We want to start here with just a massive humanitarian crisis taking place in Sudan as part of the ongoing conflict that has been happening there. And in particular, we're talking about the city of Al-Fashir in northern Darfur, which is very much at the center of the ongoing realities of the war. We are very happy to be joined, as always, by Mosaab Baba, researcher on Sudan. Mosaab, as always, thanks so much for being with us.
Hey, thank you all for having me again. It's always a pleasure.
Well, the pleasure is all ours. I wish it was in better circumstances. And I think that, to some degree, this is being reported in the news, but I still think it's underplayed as a story. Al-Fashir, which is, one of the center points of where the conflict is taking place in the Darfur region, is in a very serious humanitarian crisis. Maybe just give us a sense of where the city is, what the sort of state of the conflict is there, and what the humanitarian toll is currently.
Sure thing. So, Al-Fashir has been really one of the biggest tragedies in the war. It's in the Darfur region, and within Darfur, it's in northern Darfur. Also, Al-Fashir is the historic capital of Darfur. Its full name is Al-Fashir al-Sultan. The main groups that are there are the Darfur liberation movements that were, going to war against, the Bashir government since like 2003. So in 2020, they signed a peace deal that finally kind of, ended the war, but in a more, partially. Not all of the groups actually signed. So when the war broke out in on April 15th, 2023, they actually took a step back and said that SAF and RSF have to come to an agreement. They have to negotiate. We're not going to join the war. This is a meaningless war. We paid a huge price for our liberation and for getting to the peace deal. But then their hand got forced because of how much the war actually escalated. And then Fasher was actually one of the things. The RSF started taking over the other capitals of the states in Darfur. So they took over Niala, and of course there was one of the kind of the breaking points also was the ethnic cleansing that happened in Jinena. Jinena is far west; it's West Darfur, and there was a huge ethnic cleansing campaign that was committed by the RSF in late 2023, and that's one of the reasons why these Darfur movements said, okay, now we have to push back against the RSF. So since then, since late 2023, Al-Fashir has been a stronghold for these movements that are aligned with SAF, and they've been going at it with RSF since then. And campaign after campaign, like most of the places in Sudan saw some quiet time, but Al-Fashir has rarely seen any pauses in the attacks. So this, of course, affected the humanitarian situation. My colleagues just put out a report about literally any edible items are gone right now, all the way down to cattle feed that people were feeding on due to the humanitarian situation. There is one small lifeline, through south of Fashir. There's the Tawila area that's controlled by the SLA, led by Abdul Wahid. They haven't joined the war at all. So it's kind of a safe haven for people, but also it's still surrounded in general by the RSF in Darfur in general, because they control all four states and most of North Darfur. So that's kind of why we're seeing different kinds of escalations in the war in general. And one of the most dangerous thing is that now there's a heavy emphasis on drone warfare. So this is what makes it also a little bit different from the early days of the war, where it was mostly ground troops and it was, small, light outfits that would do hit and runs and stuff like that. And now it's moved more into drones. So you're seeing the government, supposedly the Egyptians are helping SAF in bombing cities like Niala and other areas in Darfur and also North Kordofan. And the RSF is replying by drone strikes in Khartoum. Of course, Khartoum was, taken over by SAF, and there's this SAF propaganda that everything is safe now. People should come back. Even a lot of the refugees who were in Egypt and these areas went back to Khartoum, and the RSF resumed the attacks. Was mostly attacking the military installments, but civilians were killed as well. And of course, in the SAF drone strikes, civilians are killed also. So there is sort of an escalation happening, but Al-Fashir is significant because if the RSF take over Al-Fashir, they've taken over the entirety of Darfur. And they created their own parallel government and they want legitimacy. It's exactly kind of like, the Libya situation that we talked about earlier in the year. So that's kind of manifesting right now. The only kind of saving grace is that there's a lot of pressure for SAF and RSF to sit together and call for a ceasefire and then kind of move into the negotiation period, which would mostly be handled by the African Union.
Mosaab, you've documented the role of the UAE in backing the RSF, and I'm just curious if you could break down the evidence we have of this support and how it's shaping the trajectory of this ongoing war and this humanitarian disaster that we're seeing.
Right. So the UAE didn't just come after the war. The UAE, since 2014, the UAE has been heavily involved in Sudan, especially in 2019 once Bashir was removed. Their relationship started with SAF. It didn't even start with the RSF. But basically, their main business in Sudan was the gold mining business and a little bit of agriculture as well. So it was kind of a relationship that was already there. But once Bashir was removed, they kind of moved more into an alliance with the RSF just to kind of get, not only gold and, in some of the agricultural areas, but livestock also. So it started off as more of an economic relationship. But of course, with the war in Yemen, the UAE and Saudi Arabia were the main ones who were recruiting a lot of youth from Sudan and taking them to Yemen to fight Ansar Allah. So this then turned into the UAE kind of looking at SAF as the army being a lot closer actually to Egypt and having a solid relationship with Egypt, and they put their eggs in the RSF basket. And in the beginning of the war, it actually did work. So what do we actually know? So we know that the UAE companies that are working in the gold mines, in primarily in Darfur, and as well as the weapons shipments. So a lot of the documentation were shipments of weapons coming through Chad. So the UAE in the beginning of the war, Mohammed bin Zayed, when he met with Idris Deby, and kind of because if Chad in the beginning took a position where they said we won't allow the RSF to gain a stronghold and we won't allow any help to come to them, it would have been really difficult for the RSF to continue the war. So they started using Chadian air bases, specifically an air base called Umgeres in eastern Chad, to funnel weapons over into the RSF. Also, there's been flights that have come through Uganda at the same time. There's also a lot of flight tracking for flights that come into the Bosaso airstrip, and that's in Puntland in Somalia. So the evidence of weapons coming in through these conduits is, through multiple areas into the RSF. Of course, getting a hold of documents of actual weapons sales and stuff like that is pretty difficult to do. The UAE and, doesn't really have a Freedom of Information Act or anything that you can file. So it becomes difficult to get those inside documents. But just from how, and also their political position, the UAE is always, never criticizing the RSF for anything that it's done throughout the whole war or before it, and always focusing on the fact that there's Muslim brotherhoods controlling Port Sudan. It's not an incorrect assessment, but the UAE for them, it's a rhetoric that they're using to justify their support for the RSF.
Well, let me ask you just one more question here before we let you go, Mosaab. I mean, I think one of the things, and you referenced the fall of Bashir in 2019, there is a vast sort of civil society infrastructure. I know many of those individuals have turned towards providing support for civilians in the context of the war zone, the emergency rooms, and different things like that. But, one other factor is the targeting of those political forces, by both sides when they take various cities. And I wonder how you think that, or say a little bit about, if you could, about how that's playing out and what you think the motives may be in terms of how either side wants to sort of set up a post-war scenario.
Right. So a lot of analysis is that one of the reasons for the war itself is to completely kill that mass movement that happened in 2018, 2019. Because it brought on such a wide array of Sudanese from all parts of Sudan, from all parts of the political spectrum, classes, ethnicities, religions, have all joined on one platform to say we want to remove Bashir and we want freedom, peace, and justice. Unfortunately, the neoliberal world order is pretty good at hijacking these kind of movements, and it was coerced. But the spirit remains. And that's why, like, the emergency rooms that were set up were mostly youth who were active in that movement. And, they haven't been closed down by either side because either side understands that if they, although there have been a lot of incidences of arrests, of killings, of torture, of these kind of things, and under the auspices of these are people who are cooperating with the RSF or they're cooperating with SAF. But the Sudanese are starting to ask themselves a lot of questions right now. Like, okay, so the government is saying that they want to, the SAF government or the Port Sudan government, they want to eliminate the RSF completely. That's the same thing that they said in 1983, and the South Sudan War continued until 2005. So how long is this war going to last? What's the solution coming up? Even some people are like, okay, if they want Darfur, let the RSF take Darfur, which isn't, of course, a solution. But these critical questions are starting to come up. Even questions of, well, okay, RSF has a relationship with the UAE and it's selling it gold, but SAF at the same time is selling its gold to the UAE. So what exactly is going on here? Who benefits from this war continuing? So I imagine at some point there will be another critical mass of Sudanese grassroots, civil society, activists, everybody who was kind of involved in that movement to call for the ending of the war. But what comes next would then be a big question mark because a lot of what's coming next is not going to like, the SAF and RSF are not going to like it because a lot of people are talking about accountability and transitional justice, as a means to then not only stop this war, but nobody has ever been held accountable for any of the atrocities in Sudan going back for decades. So that's one thing. Another thing is kind of a national dialogue, a people-to-people dialogue that would then answer the questions of governance, answer the questions of economy, the development, the resources, all of that stuff. Unfortunately, these things are kind of in their infancy stages right now. But I imagine as things go on, I mean, even right now, as we're talking, there's a lot of reports coming out that both SAF and RSF are in DC talking to the U.S. administration. I don't imagine a lot would come out from that. It would, if something happens, it would be kind of like the Congo thing, where it's connected to there's other strings attached, and Trump wanting a Nobel Peace Prize or something. But it's that sort of thing. Even the emergency rooms, they were nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. But you know how that went, and so we keep telling them that, like, don't be sad about it. Just look at who they actually gave it to, and that should tell you a lot about it. But yeah, we're hopeful that at least having a ceasefire and a humanitarian ceasefire, because this situation in Al-Fashir is way out of control. It is a true tragedy.
Well, as always, we really appreciate you coming on and helping us sort through it all. Mosaab Baba, as always, thanks so much for some of your time here in the Freedom Side.
Thanks, Eugene and Rania. Take care.